Hey, this is Chris from Stockspot. Now, one of the big investing trends over the last couple of years in Australia has been the explosion in growth of new actively managed ETFs. This is a whole new category of ETF that doesn't follow a market index like a lot of the traditional products and the ones that we recommend at Stockspot, but actually invests according to an active fund manager's choice of underlying shares and their decisions around market timing. Now, I wanted in this video to talk about why they've become popular and also whether you should consider them for your portfolio. So first of all, the reason active ETFs have become popular is because after many years of denial, active fund managers have realized, I believe, that ETFs aren't just a trend or a short-term blip that's going to change the industry. In fact, they're a long-term secular trend, and assets are in a very big way moving from traditional managed funds into that ETF structure. So I think active fund managers realize they're behind the eight ball on this and realize they need to have ETFs in order to attract funds in the future. The other reason I think active managers love this ETF wrapper structure is that it allows them to wipe their very poor, in most cases, track records of performance in their pre-ETF products. And so they can start with a fresh start and market their strategies to investors without having to show them the history of their actual track records, which in most cases are no good. Which then brings me to the next point of whether you should have them in your own portfolio. So having a look at the ASX data over the last few years, what we've noticed is although active ETFs make up a large proportion of the new issuances, they're only really capturing about 10% of the new assets coming into the market. In other words, most of the money is actually tracking towards the low-cost index funds, and it's only small amounts of money that are actually pouring into these active ETFs. And I think this is for good reason, because when we also crunch the numbers, the performance of these active ETFs, whether they're tracking Australian shares or global shares, haven't been particularly great. In fact, it's only about 10% of them that have done better than the traditional indexed ETFs that are listed. And I think this is one of the challenges for active ETFs, is that the transparency of their performance is now even put into the light more, and therefore more customers and more members and investors in their products can see whether they're actually doing better or worse than the benchmarks that they're compared to. So my view is, for most people, they're not really needed in your portfolios. If you are considering using an active ETF, think about it like a satellite investment, where you keep your core low cost and then consider these satellites as a way of hopefully generating some extra returns, but appreciating that the chances of that are probably not very high. My favorite quote in this space actually comes from a great investing author, William Bernstein, who basically said of active ETFs that it's like putting a bad fish in a pink wrapper rather than a blue wrapper. It doesn't mask the smell, it just changes what it looks like. And I view active ETFs as exactly like this. ETFs are just a wrapper and a different way of packaging actively managed products, but they still face the same challenges that they have in the non-ETF world, which is that their fees are too high. It's very hard to overcome their fees with enough performance to generate returns for customers. Plus, because most of the market returns come from such a small segment of the market, it's such a big probability that these fund managers don't own the small number of shares that are driving all the market returns. And these two will constantly be a problem for active managers. This isn't just a short-term problem, this is a long-term secular problem, and why I think the active management industry will continue to shrink in Australia and the rest of the world to the benefit of low-cost index ETFs.